So in the last class, we have been dealing with the last 3 verses of these Upanishads, the 15, 16 and 17. And last section of the Upanishad deals with the problem of death. Now, in the Upanishadic philosophy, you find 2 important features. One, a complete disgust for worldly pleasures or worldly life, and the fear of death. These 2 very important ideas you find it in the Upanishadic philosophy. Now you have to remember, this is the transcendental philosophy of Vedanta. We should never be under the wrong notion that the Upanishads completely neglect the realities of life in this world. With a view to take a man away from the worldly or empirical plane, to make him understand the importance of going beyond the empirical, beyond the worldly pleasures, it sometimes overemphasizes these 2 elements. One, a kind of disgust for worldly life and a fear of death. And then it proceeds to give a solution to this problem of death. And it convinces, it tells us that death is only a creative crisis. Death is not an enemy. Death is a natural phase of human evolution. And this conviction is driven home by showing that we are not this body, we are something beyond this body, which perishes at the time of death. Once a man realizes that he is beyond this body, he is the deathless reality, then he transcends death, he goes beyond death. Not that he avoids physical death, but when he realizes that he is something beyond which physically doesn't die, which doesn't die when the body perishes, then he transcends death. This is with regard to the transcendental aspect of Upanishadic philosophy. The Upanishadic philosophy also has got a realistic aspect. There is a strong element of realism as well. To go beyond this problem of death, to realize that we are the deathless Atman or soul or self, to go beyond that, to go beyond the empirical plane and to realize that supreme truth, we must first of all understand the transitoriness of worldly life. Worldly life, the reality of worldly experience or worldly life is not neglected. The Upanishad says that man needs physical comforts and he needs the instruments and the tools which bring him physical comforts, which are technically called artha and kama. Man needs that. But if man thinks that these 2 constitute the supreme goal of his existence, then he will not care for any morality, any spiritual or even cultural values. So the Upanishad says that we had to follow the path of, we had to follow the pursuit of worldly desires without deviating from the path of what is called dharma or right or righteous means, ethical or moral values. And if a man pursues the path of worldly pleasures, worldly life, without deviating from these fundamental moral values, then a time comes when he realizes that there is something beyond worldly pleasures. Only if he conducts this pursuit of worldly desires and worldly pleasures without deviating from the path of righteousness, or what is technically called dharma, then he realizes there is something beyond this. And then he looks for something transcendental. In spiritual life, that transcendental value is called moksha, or liberation, or coming out of this wheel of the cycle of life and death and rebirth. Rebirth is also a very important problem in the transcendental philosophy of Upanishads. Everyone prays to be freed from the cycle of life, death and rebirth. The Upanishad gives a message of fearlessness. The world is not something to be scared of, to be afraid of. Rebirth or life itself is not something to be afraid of. There is something beyond this. And it tells us that when a man realizes he is the Atman, the Supreme Self, which is eternal, he transcends death. But before reaching this conclusion, this Isha Upanishad presents a number of other ideas. First of all, in the beginning, it emphasizes the unity of God and the world, and the union of the contemplative and active dimensions of human life. Contemplative life and active life. God and world are reconciled. We cannot lead an exclusively contemplative life without an active element in it. Therefore, what is needed is a reconciliation. This idea is being put by Sri Ramakrishna in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna in a very simple language. The uniqueness of Sri Ramakrishna's teachings is that all these ideas have been put in the language of the common man, and using the similes and imageries of his everyday life. Sri Ramakrishna says, you touch the feet of God with one hand and work with the other hand. That's what Sri Ramakrishna says. Touching the feet of God is the contemplative element of spiritual life. And working with the other hand is the active element of spiritual life. So, in other words, the contemplative and the active aspects of life have been reconciled. And if a man reconciles both, he can live a righteous life in this world, and he can meet the problem of death with courage and wisdom. This idea of death taken as a creative, a positive element in human life is found in the lives of all great men. If you read the life of all these great personalities, one unique aspects of their life, they have been able to face the problem of death with equanimity of mind, with a tranquility of mind, which normal man cannot even think of. Some of them died just as entering from one room to another room. There is a interesting episode in the lives of Shankaracharya. According to the traditional lives of Shankaracharya, Shankaracharya was supposed to be the incarnation of Lord Shiva. So, along with him, two other divine personalities also took birth. One is the Lord of Wisdom and the Lord of Death. Both of them took birth as his companions. And when Shankaracharya reached the his fourth year, his father died. And at the time of death, what happened? This man entered his shrine, the shrine in his home, and then prayed, and then he came out, and then a mysterious old man also came out of the temple. But he didn't realize, he thought he must be the priest of the temple. And he sat and started a conversation, a discussion with Shankaracharya's father, Shivaguru. And he asked the question, Kim sarvam Krishna pranam kridam nakhila, means a question that is, have you surrendered all the actions of your life to the Lord? Have you surrendered your whole life and all the actions that you performed in your life to God? And then he says, yes, that's how I was leading my life. That's how he replied. Listening to this man entered the temple, the priest, at least he was the priest. That's what his father thought, Shankara's father thought this man was the priest. He looked like the priest. And he entered the temple and vanished. Then he also followed the priest, but there was nobody in the temple except the image of Lord Krishna. So he vanished. Then his father realized, well, my life is now coming to an end. And then he prostrated before the deity, went inside, called his son Shankara, 4 years old boy. And then he lay down, and then just before he breathed his last, he said, Hey Shankara, mrityum mitravat pasyir. This is the instruction which his father gave to Shankara. Look upon death as your friend. This is the instruction. So from that time onward, these two boys also started playing with Shankara, but not visible to others, visible only to himself. It's a story. So the idea is, when a man advances in spiritual life, he realizes that this is not the end of the journey. There is something far beyond this, and he is the one Atman, the reality, which is eternal. And once he understands, he realizes his unity with this eternal Atman, or Supreme Self, then he transcends death. He becomes identified with the deathless reality. This is now in this verse, towards the end of this verse, you can find this. I have already just mentioned this sloka. Vayuhu anilam amrdam athedam bhasmantam shariram om kratosmara kritam smara kratosmara kritam smara. I have already dealt with this verse, but I can deal with this once more. So here the Upanishad tells this devotee who was leading a virtuous life, who followed the path of truth, unselfishness and righteousness, who was worshipping Sun as a supreme God. He finds in front of him the Sun, the God whom he was worshipping standing. He requests him, he prays to him, I am now seeing you in your relative dimension, means with name and form. This name and form are always tempting elements. We are all, actually our senses, our mind are all drawn towards the name and form. So long as a man is satisfied with name and form, he will be satisfied with the idea of going to heaven. Because heaven is just an extension of man's imagination of worldly life. What we can't get here, we can get in heaven. Maybe whatever pleasure we get, We may get, but in a more intense, perhaps in a more limitless way we get. But the moment a man transcends the empirical, the relative, then he starts thinking of something beyond heaven. In fact, Upanishads are the only books which take us beyond the concept of heaven. So here he prays, let my breath be merged in that cosmic energy, power, that's called prana. And I know my body will be reduced to ashes. At the time of death, the devotee he prays to his own mind, please remember your good deeds. As I said in the last class, whatever we remember the time of death decides our next life. Now, according to Vedanta, there is a belief that if a man dies chanting pranava, means omkara, om, that's why in mantra ki om kratosmara, kritam smara, play or mind contemplate on omkara pranava. If a devotee who is not a jivan mukta, who has not attained liberation, if he dies chanting pranava, mantra, omkara, he will get gradual liberation. He may go to heaven, but again gradually, after crossing different levels of existence, ultimately he will become one with the infinite reality, and then he will come out of this cycle of life and death. That is ultimate goal. See, life as human life, as a worldly life, is something negligible, something which is finite. But this life also becomes an instrument in our hands if we live it properly. If we guide our actions, mental, physical and intellectual actions properly, then this life becomes a useful instrument. This life can take us beyond the ocean of worldly existence. That's what the Upanishad says. So it says, Vayuhu anilam amrdam mathedam bhasmantam shariram om kratosmara kritam smara kratosmara kritam smara. He asks his own mind to think of whatever actions he had done. I already referred once to a very interesting episode in the Bhagavata Purana, which is one of the most well-known episodes which drive home the implication of this particular verse. In the all Upanishads you find the relative and also the transcendental dimensions of philosophy. If you take, for example, Kathopanishad, you find the narration of Nachiketa's early experiences and the two boons which Yama gives to him. Nachiketa first asks for worldly pleasure. If I go to my home, my father should not be angry with me. That's the first boon. The second boon that he asked for was heavenly pleasure. The third boon that he asked was this. Some people say that after death there is nothing more left out. And according to some other people, there is something beyond death. So, Ayam prete vijigitsa manushe asti tyege nayam astidi chaige edad vidya manusishtas toyakam varanamesha varastrudiyeka. This is in fact, this verse stands at the turning point of the philosophical evolution in Kathopanishad. There is the relative and also the absolutistic dimensions, the empirical and the non-empirical, the trans-empirical aspects of philosophy. In Mundaka Upanishad you find the same. A great householder comes to a sage with the name Ankira, ask him, what is the supreme knowledge by knowing which one can know of everything? In reply to this question, the sage tells him there are two types of wisdom or learning or knowledge in this world, the relative and absolute. Except the transcendental experience, all other learning, all other types of wisdom are relative. Apara, the other is para. We experience this indescribable experience, this trans-empirical consciousness or experience is the only wisdom which is supreme. Again in the Chandogya Upanishad, there is an interesting episode. A great sage of those days, Narada, who is a well-known figure in Hindu mythology, he himself was a very learned man. He comes to a great sage, a man of wisdom of that time. He's called Sanat Kumara, and tells him, I have learned all the Vedas, everything, Upanishads, all. But still, I feel that there is something yet to be learned. What is that wisdom? Before he started speaking, Sanat Kumara asked the sage Narada, you tell me what all you have learned. So in reply, Narada tells him, well, I have learned Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, Samaveda, Atharveda, and all the prevailing branches of learning of that age. Then, after he gave a long list of whatever books he had mastered, then Sanat Kumara, the great teacher, tells him, Nama eva, all these are words only. So the greatness of Upanishads is this. The Upanishads tell us that there is a much higher learning, a much higher wisdom, which the Upanishads themselves cannot explain or define. And that is the supreme experience. Now one can reach the supreme experience only by transcending the empirical or the phenomenal. But how to do that? How to go beyond this? For that, one should lead a virtuous life. And if he leads a virtuous life, a life based on righteousness and moral values, spiritual values, even if he had not realized the supreme truth, he will have a higher life in his next life. He can lead a higher life in his next life. And then slowly he can progress till he realizes that he is the eternal supreme consciousness. Yeah, as I said in the Bhagavata Purana, there is a famous episode. That's what I was trying to refer to. There, the entire Bhagavata Purana is a response, a highly metaphysical response to a question asked to the teacher. The question was, what should a dying man do? That was the question. Because if the problem of death can be solved, the problem of life also can be solved. Man commits all errors, man goes out of his way to achieve worldly pleasures. He commits crimes and he does evil deeds just because at the time of doing those things, he thinks that what he is going to achieve by those deeds will bring eternal peace to him at the time of doing. So, but if he realizes that whatever he can achieve in this world are finite, limited things, they cannot bring eternal peace and happiness to him, then he may pursue, he may do many things to achieve them, but he will not go out of his way to achieve those goals. Now here, a great king, his name is Parikshit. Parikshit was a great emperor, but he happened to commit one heinous sin. Just only one. In his whole life he committed only one heinous sin. One day he went out hunting in the forest. He got tired. He entered a hermitage. Inside, a great sage was meditating. This man was very hungry, very tired, and very thirsty. And he found the sage was still seated, absorbed in meditation. He didn't get up and offer him a seat or offer him drinking water, nothing. So this man, this king, who was otherwise a nice man, noble man, he thought this sage is not showing me proper respect. So I should teach him a lesson. Is he just pretending, or is he a genuine sage? Let me see. And he looked around there. He found just outside the hermitage, he found a dead body of a snake. He took the dead body of the snake and put it around the neck here as a garland, and went his way, went away. After some time, this sage's son came to the hermitage, and he found this horrible thing. Somebody had put the corpse of the dead body of a snake around his father's neck, and he was horrified. And the boy himself also was a great man. He himself was spiritually, he himself was an advanced soul. He had performed many spiritual practices. So he had some divine faculties. And the story tells us that he went to the river, took bath, and then he cursed. The man who committed this heinous sin shall die on the 7th day. So that was the curse. And when the sage opened his eyes, he found the son standing there, and the son told him what he did. And the sage was very unhappy. He was shocked. He said, "What did you do against the king? If the king dies, the whole country will be submerged in anarchy. There will be chaos everywhere. So you did a great wrong by cursing a king. You should not have done it." He sent a messenger to the king. "My son, out of his impertinence or immaturity, cursed you, but his words will never go wrong. If he curses somebody, it will work." Because the son also, the small boy, he has performed many austerities, so he also had acquired many divine powers. But how the king received this news, that's the most important subject here. The king suddenly realized that he had committed a heinous crime by insulting a great sage. So he said, "Well, I deserve it." And then he counted 7 into 24. How many hours? That much. He was not frightened. He was not horrified. He said, "Well, this is what I deserve for the wrong which I committed, for the crime which I committed." And he renounced his palace, his kingdom. He crowned his son as the next king, and went to the banks of Ganga river, Ganges. And he decided to spend the next 7 days in contemplation and meditation on God, sitting on the banks of the Ganga. Hearing this news, all the sages also came to the banks of the Ganga, because they also were impressed by the wisdom of the king. The king was not angry when he received this terrible news. Rather, he welcomed it as a sign of God's grace. And because that enabled him to spend the next 7 days of his life in complete contemplation on God. If there was no curse, perhaps he would have died an accidental death fighting with his enemies or something like that. But here, because of this curse, he could spend the last days of his life in contemplation and meditation on God. So hearing this news, all the saints and sages of that particular region assembled there, congratulated him, you are an ideal devotee of God. And also, on the next day, another great sage also happened to come there. He was Shuka. Shuka was Shukadeva. Shuka was the son of Vyasa. He was greater than Vyasa, a much more renowned sage than his own father, Vyasa. So it is said, when Shuka came, Parikshit puts 2 questions to Shuka. The question was this: I am going to put a question to you. What are the questions? What should one hear? What should one chant? What mantra should one chant? How should one perform? How one should meditate? Whom should we contemplate on? And what he should not do? Who? The man who is about to die. What should a dying man do? And what should a dying man not do? This is the question. So, ata prachami samsiddhim yoginam paramam gurum purusha seha yat karyam mriyamanasya sarvata. Means the man who is facing death, whom death is staring at his face, what should he do? Yes rotavyam atho japyam yat kartavyam nirbhi prabho smartavyam bhajaniyam va bruhi yadva viparya. So whom one should meditate, whom he should contemplate on, what divine holy names he should chant, and how he should perform his duties and responsibilities. In reply to this, Shuka gives the reply. There's a last clause in this question, Bruhi yadva viparyam. What one should not do. In fact, if a spiritual aspirant learns this, he can never do anything wrong. Because every moment when we do something wrong, we believe the world is real. A criminal commits a crime, thinking at least for a split moment that deed will give him something in the form of contentment, happiness, joy, or whatever it is. A man steals money, though he may have read books, he may know that money is certainly not eternal. Still, at the time of doing that split second, he comes under a powerful delusion that money will bring everything. Otherwise, he won't commit that crime. Now, you may ask the question, if there are many enlightened, well-educated criminals, they know perfectly well that money won't bring them everything. It is true, but at the time of committing the crime, they forget it. That is what is called the power of Maya. Because, as I said some days back in that Vivekananda hall, somebody puts this question. Swami Vivekananda's definition of Maya. Maya is a statement of fact. So, a mother brings up the child with all care, affection, and attachment, all that. But a child becomes a renegade. He becomes ungrateful. Still, the mother remains too attached to the child to realize the folly of continuing that kind of blind attachment. Still, it becomes a kind of golden shackle, chain which she cannot break. She knows that it is absolutely ridiculous, but she can't do it. And the problem is, we are under the delusion not because we are intellectually unaware of it. Everyone knows, most people know many things about spiritual values, religious values, but still cannot practice them. To say that people are not aware of it, that they are in need of intellectual information, is wrong. Most people in the modern world know that money cannot bring everything. Even you need not be religious, you need not believe in God to realize that money will not bring everything. Any intelligent man will know. But still people go out of their way to procure money. And that is what is called the power of Maya. So intellectual information is not the solution to this problem. So Shuka first takes up the later part of the question put by Parikshit. Bruhi yadva viparyayam, what one should not do if he wants to face the problem of death without fear, if he wants to face death as a friend. Say, just as Shankaracharya's father instructed the son, mrityum mitravat pashyed, means you should look upon death as your friend. So Shuka says what really happens to people who are under the strong delusion that the world is real, money is real, and worldly pleasures can bring eternal happiness. They commit all kinds of crimes and sins, and then they die a miserable death. They are reborn, and again they relive a miserable life, and again they are dead, and again this cycle continues. This is the fate of people who do not realize the folly of looking upon the world as eternal, as worldly pleasures as eternal. Then he says, then takes up the other verse. Now, what should be one's goal? This can be practiced by a child who is going to live for 100 years, and also a 100-year-old man who is going to die in a day or two. Both type of people. A child who is going to live for 100 years can practice this philosophy of life, and also a 100-year-old man who is going to die the next day can also practice. So Shuka gives the answer. Etavan Sankhya Yogabhyam Sudharma Parinishtaya Janma Labha Parapumsam Ante Narayana Smriti. I shall explain in English. He says, Ante Narayana Smriti means remembering God when we breathe our last. That's what it actually means. If one can remember God, or if one can remember something auspicious, that is the supreme goal of human existence. This can be achieved by many means. Just look around, see everything, see how people live. If you read newspapers, San Francisco Chronicle, or any newspaper you read, any book you read, anything, if you look around, you can see the world is certainly not eternal. Any right-thinking man can do. That's what Buddha did. Buddha was a 28-year-old young prince, was married, had one child, was brought up in luxury without any knowledge of the problems of the world, miseries of the world. And one day it happened as a coincidence. In fact, his father didn't allow him to come out. He was afraid because an astrologer had predicted this man is going to be the emperor. Emperor in spiritual empire. That's what astrologer meant. So the king possibly feared that this boy is going to be a mendicant, a monk who will renounce the king and palace, everything, which the father didn't like. So he was brought up in exclusive luxury without any knowledge of the world outside. But one day, anyhow, he was being taken along the street in a chariot, and he found somebody taking a dead body to the cremation ground. Then he found an old man who wrinkled, can't walk properly. And then he found a sick man, and then he found a saint also. But one speciality of the face of the saint was that we were perfectly calm and quiet. In all other people, he found a miserable face. So he wanted to find out the truth behind it, he left everything, and he became Buddha. So, I don't say that, I don't mean that everyone should become a Buddha or can become a Buddha. That's not what I mean. But any rational man can become a Vedantin if he looks around and analyzes the life that he meets around him. Or that is Sankhya, or Yoga Abhyam, or one can practice purity of mind. One can, that is Ashtanga Yoga, it's a little more complicated. Or through Karma Yoga. Whatever you have to do, whatever duty or responsibility you have to perform, you perform as an offering to God. Every act becomes a worship of God. So, if we don't practice this, even worship becomes a work. The ideal is to turn every act into an act of worship. Then every moment becomes meditation. The whole world becomes a temple. And that's how one can lead a spiritual life. That's what Swami Vivekananda called the spiritualization of the totality of human existence. That's a term which Swami used. Spiritualization of the totality of human existence. So, Swadharma Paridishtaya, these are three methods which Shuka prescribes. If you do that, any of these means, or any life you live, see, whatever work one is doing, business, in teaching or farming or anything, any work, whatever may be. If one can look upon oneself as an instrument in the hands of God and his work as an act of worship of God, then his whole life becomes spiritualized. And then inevitably his last thought will be centered around God. So, Ante Narayanasma, this is the supreme goal of human existence. And this is how a man should lead his life. And this is possible, this should be possible, this should be the ideal for a 1-year-old child who is going to live for 100 years, as well as for a 100-year-old man who is going to die the next day. That's why the Upanishad says, Om Kradosmara Kridam Smara. Remember your past deeds. Your mind, turn back, look back, and remember your auspicious deeds, your virtuous deeds. So that, thinking of these deeds, I can breathe my last and I can have a higher existence in my next life. The devotee, perhaps, is not, in this context, is not looking for ultimate realization. Remember, these Upanishads, you have to remember, the Upanishads do not consider a single compact book. It contains different levels of metaphysical, spiritual ideas. So in this context, in this particular verse, we can find a devotee who has led a good moral life and who is about to die, just expressing his desire to think of the good things he has done so that he can have a higher life in the next. This is. The last verse comes 18th. Agnenaya suphataraye asman vishwani deva vayunani vidwan yodhyasmad juhuranameno bhuishtham te nama uktim vithema. Agni, fire god is an important figure in Vedic literature. In fact, the first verse in Rig Veda, which is the oldest of Hindu scriptures, begins with a prayer glorifying Agni or fire. Agni mele purohitam yajnasya deva murticham kotaram ratnadhatamam. This is the first verse in the Rig Veda mantra. So Agni is an important figure in Upanishadic and Vedic philosophy. So here this devotee prays to Agni. Hey Agni, please take me to a higher region and please lead me by a proper path. That's called, I already explained earlier, Uttarayana Marga. The path of the divine, the path of gods, which will ultimately take you to higher and higher levels of existence, finally culminating in the unity of the eternal consciousness. An experience which breaks the chain of life and death, the cycle. So, in the last verse, the devotee prays to the fire, God, Agni, please leave